So good morning, everybody. We can see that there's people logging in now. Welcome to the Reading Solutions UK's first International Reading Conference. For those of you who haven't heard of Reading Solutions, they work with schools to improve pupils' reading fluency, stamina, comprehension through the online reading development programme Reading Plus. So my name is Christina Cabitas and I'm going to be the host. I've been the host of the conference for the next few days. So I'm an author and a founder of Children's Literature Festivals charity. And I was so excited to be hosting this conference today. So a lot of this work resonates around the work that I do. So I do visit lots of schools and visit children, and I write as to how I would have learned better. I'm not a teacher, but I do visit lots of schools and have a positive impact on children as well. So I'm really looking forward to, so we're very excited that for you all to join Dr. Paula Williams today, who's an educational psychologist at Psychology for Learning. Paula will be discussing reading fluency, the research around it and what works. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box throughout. And Paula will aim to answer all of these at the end. I'll read those questions out and we'll aim to answer as many as we can at the end. The Reading Solutions team will be monitoring the chat box and we'll share Paula's contact details in there as well, should you have any follow-up questions for her. So in the meantime, I'm going to hand you over to Paula. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Christina. And I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. So, Christina, can you just give me a nod if you can see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen. I shall mute myself now.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking this morning about reading fluency principles and how we can put those into practice to improve reading fluency. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour because we've got 45 minutes and I'm hoping that you'll get a lot out of this session and we can have good quality questions at the end. So just a bit of background about me. I've been an ed psych for the last 33 years and a teacher before that. I know I don't look that old, haha. I completed my doctorate at UCL in reading fluency. And the research was based on 6 years of interventions within schools in the home counties, starting from 2014 to 2020, supported by an extensive literature search. And what I'm going to talk to you about are the principles that I gleaned from the research, but how I have put them in practice as an EP and been able with staff in schools to facilitate greater fluency in children's reading. So what you're going to get out of the session today is, what is reading fluency? There's a lot of talk about it, but in the UK, I don't think it's explained very well. So by the end of the session, I hope you're much clearer. We're going to look at why we need to promote reading fluency in the UK, what the research tells us. That the research in the United States has been around for a good 20 years. And as I was doing my doctorate, I kept thinking, why haven't we heard about this? Why isn't this research coming into the UK? Why are we not using what our colleagues in the States have been doing for some time? I'm going to look at what worked and show you with some videos and talk about the difference it's made so far that for the classes, the schools and the children that I've been working with and the parents. So why fluency matters? It's unbelievable that in 2022, we have 1 in 5 students in the UK that leave schools not at the expected literacy levels. So that applies for the end of Key Stage 2. We have 20% of pupils that don't meet the standards. And then we have another 20%, probably the same 20%, leaving school altogether, deemed to be largely illiterate. Now that shouldn't happen. We know everything we need to know about how we teach reading, and we need to change things. Okay, so what we know about fluency is, and taking this quote from the Reading Framework 2022, it's a key indicator of future success in further education, higher education, and employment. And following on from that, and it makes sense that if you struggle with your reading, the chances are you're going to have greater negative life outcomes because you're not able to access those higher education levels. So it's really important. And finally, fluent reading allows us, sorry, I'm quoting from the Reading Framework again, in which it says fluent decoding allows us to understand what we read. Now, I think they've got that slightly wrong. I think that statement should be fluent reading allows us to understand what we read, because decoding, phonetic decoding on its own often doesn't help children to understand what they're reading because it's all broken down. And it doesn't aid fluency. And I'll talk a bit about that as we go through the session. But what I really want us to focus on is the real purpose of reading. The purpose of reading is to extract meaning. And so I want you to think about the children you work with. When they're reading, do they realize that is the purpose of reading? Because in my experience, most children who are particularly struggling with reading think that the purpose of reading is to decode words. They think it's a puzzle. It's not. We've got to be able to get to that understanding of what's being said. Okay, so just looking at the UK context to give us some background, we know in 2006 to 2009, the governments were saying phonetics is not taught well enough. That's what the Rose Report came out with. And so since that, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a real promotion, and teaching staff are brilliant at teaching phonics. But the problem seems to be coming, in my view, that it's very much promoted as the main tool for teaching reading. I would say it's a great tool in Key Stage 1 for learning simple CVC words or phonetically regular words. Great tool. I'm not a phonics denier. We need to use it. However, I think we need to question whether it needs to be promoted for children beyond Key Stage 1. What we know is that struggling readers who are not managing to read are often given more phonics intervention, and Ofsted recently stated they were going to go into schools and assess the phonics interventions that are being taught in schools. I would say if phonics has been taught as part of a good quality first education, then if a child hasn't got phonetic understanding by the end of Key Stage 1, then there's a reason for that. Another really important finding from the research was the majority of English words that Key Stage 2 pupils come across are not phonetically regular. And the results are something like 51% to 81% of words that children view can't be phonetically decoded. So in effect, if we just teach them using phonics, we're only giving them a tool to access about a fifth, or maybe pushing it, depending if you have phonetically regular books, more words. But most words are not phonetically regular. Another interesting finding from the literature search was that guided reading in the UK, it has not been found to be an effective method. Now, in most schools, it does seem to be being faded out. The reason it seems to be is that guided reading as it was in the States often mixed up the group. So you had struggling readers with more able readers, and there was more variation in how they approached it. My experience of an EP watching a guided reading session was to see a TA often behaviourally managing children in the struggling groups who were very much switched off to the reading that was often very stilted, and children weren't engaged. And the other thing was those children who were all put together in a group often didn't have a model. Sometimes the TA would model the reading, but often, in my experience, they didn't. And they went round a circle just asking children to read individually. And that's, in my opinion, why it doesn't work. We haven't got appropriate modelling. Okay, so just having a think about struggling readers before we come to fluency. Most of them have had good quality teaching. Most of them are struggling at the accuracy level. And I don't know if you're familiar with the learning hierarchy, but we need to become accurate before we become fluent. And fluency is just getting quicker at the skills that you have. But struggling readers get stuck at that acquisition level and rarely become fluent readers. So we need to address that. 20% of students who struggle often have a difficulty processing phonetic information. So no matter how good your phonics interventions are, if that child has got a phonetic discrimination difficulty, they're not going to be able to read that way. And the groups of children that I see having these difficulties tend to be those with hearing difficulties or language, those with literacy, specific literacy difficulties, i.e. of a dyslexic nature or just not hearing the phonological differences, and also children who have autism. I often find that children with autism don't get the phonics because they can't understand. Why is a cat? A cat written as cat is surely a cat. They take things literally. I mean, it's a slight generalization there, but they are the groups that I regularly come across in my work that struggle with phonics. And I have to say, over my 33 years as an EP, I really thought being called in to look at literacy difficulties would have been a thing of the past. But in the last 10 years, it's probably the most common issue that I get called into schools about. Okay, so let's have a look at reading fluency. I'm quoting the reading framework because that's the latest guidance from the government. So I'm sure many of you are aware of this. It says, researchers generally define and measure fluency in terms of the numbers of words read correctly per minute. Accuracy as well as speed influences fluency. But it's not just about speed, it's warning, which is quite right. The national, and here I'm interested why it's tagging this next statement on, but let's have a look. The national curriculum refers to pupils reading words comprising the Year 1 grapheme phoneme correspondence accurately and speedily, reflecting this concept of fluency. Now, I may be wrong, but on two counts. One, it's very difficult to judge a child in Year 1 to be a fluent reader. Yes, they can pick up the words, but they're often given phonetically regular text, and it doesn't mean that given a normal piece of real reading, they would be able to be fluent with that. But in the research shows that reading quickly single words, which I'm taking grapheme phoneme corresponding words to be, that doesn't correlate to reading fluency. So if you have reading tests that just measure single words, they have a very low correspondence with an actual reading fluency score. So the definition I've preferred and used in my doctorate was by Kuhn et al. And it states, so think about your understanding of fluency now before I read this out, because did you know this? Did you know about these components? So fluency combines accuracy, automaticity, and oral reading prosody, which taken together facilitate the reader's construction of meaning. That for me is a great definition, very succinct. That's what we're aiming for. And I'll be talking about each of those in a minute. I did also put in there a reading framework quote because it does acknowledge from Marianne Wolf, although again, I'm a little unsure about their wording because they state it as an unsettling conclusion. That reading fluency involves every process and subskill involved in reading. It is influenced by the development of rapid rates of processing in all components of reading. Brilliant. I totally agree with Marianne Wolf there. There's a lot involved in reading fluency. And what I would say is it's not all about phonics. Okay. So just a bit of background. One of the main theory behind reading fluency was put out by LeBurge and Samuels in 1974 and said that in order to be a fluent reader, you need to start at the word level. You need to recognize the individual letters, the phonics involved in the words or the letters. You need to then put them together, synthesize those into words, then move on to phrases. Can you read a simple phrase? And then sentences and paragraphs. So you're building up from the basic building blocks that are the letters to words to phrases to sentences to major works of literature. But what LeBurge and Samuel said was that children have a limited amount of cognitive attention, so that if they are focusing on decoding, that's more or less all they can focus on. All our brain energy is taken up on figuring out what this word says. And if a lot of energy goes into that, then they will struggle to comprehend, which is exactly right. So what you need to do in order to be able to comprehend is look at a word and recognize it automatically. And that's reading fluency. Okay, so what that means in practice is if a student is spending too much time on the decoding, they're unlikely to attend to meaning. Whereas the flip of that is fluent readers recognize words really quickly. And then they're freed up to focus more energy, more cognitive attention on understanding what has been said. Okay, so just unpicking that definition by Kuhn et al. Of fluency, competent readers need to be accurate, automatic. The research shows children need to be reading at 50 words per minute to be able to free themselves up to focus that cognitive attention on the meaning of the text. They also need to be expressive, because if they are stilted readers, they're not using appropriate expression. And they also need to understand what they're reading. And what Rosinski, I don't know if any of you heard Tim's talk the other day, but his focus is very much on this formula that reading accuracy, reading pace, quick recognition, and expression, which is identifying those prosodic skills, is the bridge towards greater understanding. Does that fit with your understanding? Does that fit with what you're doing in schools or what you see being done in schools? I'm not sure most teaching staff are aware of those components, but we're going to go on to why they're important and how we assess them. The research in the States initially started off saying reading pace is really important. We need to get all children to do that 90 words per minute. Let's get them reading quicker. But they quickly realized that even though the children got quicker at reading, they didn't necessarily comprehend any better. So what they then started looking at, so what is the ingredient that might make the difference? And the research has shown it's expression. So the ability to stop and think about the text and read it with appropriate expression will determine what you understand from the text. And just to illustrate this, try reading that bottom sentence out to yourself and see what understanding you glean from that sentence. Now, there'll be two ways of reading it. You might read it as, a woman without her man is nothing. Okay, so that's got one meaning. Whereas you could also read it as, a woman without her man is nothing. I always find it really interesting because there generally are gender differences in how people read this, but it is interesting where you put the pauses can alter the meaning. So expression is really important for aiding our comprehension. So when I started my doctorate, I just felt that reading fluency needed to be important. And so did the literature search and identified two key components. So I couldn't rush into an intervention. The research clearly showed assessment was important. We know that assessment has to inform our practice. And then we need to apply evidence-based practices. So that's what I did. My doctoral study was carried out in 2 schools, and then has been extended to other schools beyond that, and focused on whole class interventions. So let's look at how we assess reading fluency and reading skills. Okay, so just as the backdrop, the reading framework tells us that we need to assess children's phonetic knowledge. It goes on to say that we should be asking children to read grapheme, phoneme corresponding words that identify which ones they can't read and teach them those. Then it says, ask children to read 20 real words and 20 pseudo words. The research shows that pseudo words have no correlation with reading fluency. So no matter how many pseudo phonetic words you read, that won't aid fluency in itself. The government says this assessment should only take 5 minutes. And it also adds around 90 words per minute is a good indicator. Doesn't tell you how to do it. But it just throws that in. There's a nod to the research in the States, but I think it could have gone further in explaining or giving a toolkit, which is what you're going to get out of this session, to know how to do that. And what the reading framework says is reading comprehension is not assessed until a child is a fluent reader. Again, I think there's a slightly mixed message. For early readers, I think we should be exploring the context of the book, what's happening, get children expressing language, thinking about the pictures, the meaning of those words that they have read. And we can't, it's right, we shouldn't assess children's reading, but don't let that stop you. And I know it won't, exploring and extending children's thinking about the books they're reading. Okay. So in my research, I started off by asking all the teaching staff to carry out this assessment, which is based on Rosinski and Paddock's 3-minute reading assessment, which I've added to with a comprehension element. And so I asked the staff to do this for all the children in their classes. And what we did was a measure of accuracy, speed, expression, and comprehension, which I'm going to just go over with you now. So, informally, my doctorate was called Back to the Future because as a teacher in the late 1980s, I was doing this all the time, and yet it doesn't seem to be commonplace in our schools anymore, which is a shame. So in order to measure reading accuracy, I asked the teachers and TAs to carry out a running record of a child's reading. This was their natural reading book. They could either do it on a 10 by 10 square, and then you can measure, you've got 100 words there, and you can do the calculation. How many words out of the 100 read does the child read accurately? And that's where you get your reading accuracy measure. I've been doing those for 33 years and they're really easy for me generally, but the staff found it quite difficult to do a blank running record. So they photocopied the reading records, as you can see here, and this child read most of this text very well. There was only one word they couldn't read, and that was collided. And so this child achieved a reading accuracy of 99%. Okay. We then take the percentage that the child's got and we use the BETS criteria. It's very old, but it's reliable. And it gives you a measure of how appropriate is that reading text for the child. If they're reading at 90% and below, it's called frustration level. It's too difficult generally for them. Now, I'm talking about Key Stage 2, age 7 and above mainly, because it's very difficult to do this with, well, you can do it with Key Stage 1 reading books, but they'll have lower levels, but that's often appropriate. So Key Stage 2. 90 to 98% is regarded as instructional level, and 99 plus is regarded as independent reading, and it's too easy. Amy, I've seen you've put your hand up. Can you pose it as a question to Christina, and I will come back to it at the end. Okay, so BETS gave us the measure of how appropriate are the texts that children are currently reading in the class. So that was accuracy. We then took a pace measure. How quickly can the children read? You can use the same blank running record, or you can use the same photocopy and you put a mark at 1 minute. So once the child has read the text for a minute, you put a mark. And actually this child was reading at a pace of 120 words per minute. So that's great. You can see that from all the ticks. This child is reading, to all intents and purposes, this text fluently. Okay. Just backtracking slightly, before I started, I did ask all the staff, how do you measure reading competencies? And what they said was, we do it intuitively. We get this sense of whether the reading is now fluent or not. Whereas I was saying, well, actually, I think we need more specific measures. So here, just reading one text, we got two very clear measures, accuracy and pace for this child, that would then enable us to move on to plan an appropriate programme of study for all the children. Once we got the reading pace for this child, in the UK, we don't have any reading pace norms, but Rosinsky and Paddock do. And what I've done is just converted their research into UK norms. So we need to be cautious. These are US students, not UK students, but I have found it pretty reliable when working with children. And you can tell those that are slow. Okay. So, yeah, look out for Rosinsky and Paddock's work on that. The third component is expression. And again, I went back to Tim Rosinsky's work, and Tim has devised this multifunctional fluency scale. So we can now get a rating of a child's expressive skills, their prosodic skills, how expressive they are, the phrasing they use, how smooth they are, and the pace. What I did was play some video clips to the teachers and the teaching assistants and ask them to rate it. And we got a high level of correlation on their ratings. As you can see, it's a 4-point scale, and you tick where you think the child is at. Yes, it's subjective, but it's giving us a notional measure. This child scored 11, and Rosinsky and Paddock Rosinsky says that any score under 10 needs work doing on expression. So this child was very much borderline and didn't need specific input for their expression, but we're noting that they are borderline. Just to give a brief illustration of this, have a think about how you might be rating these two children reading.
This loud voice.
Deep in the heart of London was at the house where the Darling family lived. Wendy Darling shared a nursery with
The leafy green old folks' home. It looks very fancy. Everywhere has been decorated with strings and balloons for the wedding. Teacup Tony and the saucers have been set up, their equipment ready to play. Uncle Kevin and Auntie Alice and
Loud voice. Oops, sorry about that. Let's just go back. So you can see there's a very different style to these children's expression, and hopefully you identified the first child as needing work on expression. The second reader is absolutely fine in her smoothness, her volume, her pace, and wouldn't need any further intervention there. Okay. And finally, assessing comprehension. The easiest way to do that is to ask a student just to summarize what they've read. Just tell me all you can remember about the story so far. And you'll pick up those children that have just barked at print and haven't attended to any of the meaning, because they generally won't be able to summarize. Other things that need to be asked are, can they clarify any of the words they've read? Can they make predictions about what might come next? And are there any questions left unanswered? So a really simple way of checking out comprehension. This assessment is very informal. It's not a formalized one. If you identify children have difficulties with these, then you can go down the more formalized route. But it's a really quick way of identifying where do your students have difficulties. And just to throw in that reading fluency isn't a fixed entity. I'm assuming you're all fluent readers, but if I ask you to read a passage from the Jabberwocky, you might start to realise, actually, maybe I'm not as fluent as I thought, because there will be some text that you'll have to read a few times to get familiar with them. Okay, so it's important to remember fluency is variable according to the text you read. Okay, so what did we find in the research? Well, we found 20% of the students in the Year 4 cohort had no challenge in their reading books at all. And 34% had very little challenge. Their heads were horrified, but then went, but do you know what? That's an easy fix. We'll move the Year 5 books down, the Year 6 books down, we'll get Year 6 more books. But they found it invaluable in identifying what books were appropriate for their children. Interestingly, only 8% of pupils were found to be on books that were too difficult. So the problem lay in books offering very little challenge to most students, or to lots of students. 57% of students were reading too slow, and 59% of children were felt to use insufficient expression. So a very simple assessment that was less than 3 minutes gave lots of useful information. So then we needed to think about, what do we do with that? And the intervention part then came in from the literature research. We identified evidence-based practices that would make a difference. And these were instructional teaching. So that's the model, lead, test. So I do it, we do it, you do it. And I've got an example of that coming up. Paired and shared reading, which has been found to be 3 times more effective than most interventions, and certainly than doing nothing. And repeated reading. So the research shows if you read a text 3 times, your comprehension improves. You will get it. So what I encouraged staff to do was read the text, then lead it with the children, get them reading the text back to you. And then the third reading is the whole class read that text back to you. So the key factor was that adults always model the reading. They model how the accuracy sounds, what the pace should be like, and how to express that piece of text. And you can carry out guided reading sessions, but do it this way. Use that model of adult reads it, adult reads with child, then the children read it back to the adult for the 3rd time, if you want to improve comprehension. And what I'd say is, what we need to do is encourage parents to be doing this too. Okay, so they were the 3 methods I was telling staff to use at every opportunity: the instructional teaching, paired shared reading, and repeated readings. So what we found worked well was that adults took the modelling on board. They were able to talk very explicitly about how they paced and the reading, what expression they needed to use, and they used a variety of genre to show how expression changes according to the text. They were told to do that at every opportunity, not in the English lessons. And the repeated and echo reading was reinforced, as I've already said. So those were the practices that teachers found most effective, not just in the whole class, but then the TA was doing that in small groups as well. So just to build on that, what was lovely, one teacher in a TA in one of the classes that I've done it in, the teacher did the reading, but occasionally she stumbled. And then the TA came in and gave her the whole word. And that worked beautifully, and I'll talk about the results in a minute. Choral reading also works well. So that is different parts of the class taking different passages to read to each other. So all the children with cardigans read the next passage. All the children with jumpers read the next passage. The research shows unanimously children do not like reading on their own. The great thing about reading together is struggling readers hear the appropriate models and they can sub-vocalize, and then they're rarely switched off because they want to join in with the rest of the group and look like they're doing it. The research also shows that using reading theatre, so practicing the text and performing it, improves expression and comprehension, and also singing it. So we encourage the teachers to take songs and put them up on the board and read them as they're singing. And it's brilliant how children forget they've got reading struggles when they're singing. So what can we do for struggling readers? Just the same things, exactly the same that we were doing in the whole class. Really important that we widen the genres. I don't like seeing so many phonetically regular books that children are being asked to read. I think it's limiting their diet. So one of the things the staff were told was widen up everything that you're doing. Bring in as many genres as you can. Why? Because we know the research shows the more children read, and especially at home, the greater their vocabulary. It's outstanding, the difference that makes to children's vocabulary. So in the comprehension part, I added in reciprocal teaching by Palansker and Brown. Oh, sorry. And you'll see that's replicated in the comprehension assessment. So I asked the teaching staff to focus for a week on building children's summarising skills, a week on questioning, a week on clarification skills, and a week on predictive skills. The idea behind reciprocal teaching is that you then allocate the roles to different students when they're being detectives and looking at text. But in year 4, they found that quite difficult. They didn't quite have all of the skills, including social skills, to manage taking on the roles themselves. And the teaching staff felt this was something that needed to be ongoing over a longer period. So the findings, if you look at, the statistical analysis showed over a 12-week period, accuracy and rate improved significantly. Comprehension didn't in the statistical analysis, but just out of interest, I thought I'd use Brooks' criteria that he used in what works well for literacy. And what we found was in the intervention group, the accuracy improved over 12 weeks by 19 months. Their rate improved by 17 months, and the comprehension of the students increased by 11 months. So although it didn't reach statistical significance, there was a difference. And the difference seemed to be the intervention group started off lower in their comprehension skills than the control group. The control group got nothing. They didn't know what the intervention was about, but they'd also improved their comprehension skills by the means they normally use in teaching. But we were astounded by the results and really pleased, and staff knew it. But for me, what was great was that the staff loved it. They found that they had a greater understanding of how to assess reading. They had clarity on what processes to take and which instructional practices to use. They had very much been using phonics and guided reading, so this was a change for them. What they liked about the assessment was it identified where the children needed to have the input. They realised the importance of language as they're talking, and a failing school used the line, "The Witch and the Wardrobe." They really wanted to challenge things, and they were so impressed by what the children got out of it, and the staff felt more confident. And one teacher said, "You've put the fun back in. You've given me permission to have fun in my teaching again." How good was that? The differences they noted for the students were that the students became more proactive, more socially supportive of each other, and more confident. They were enjoying reading. Interestingly, they got better at writing too, and they had a greater understanding. And in fact, the TA said, "Paula, I don't care what your statistical analysis says, I know this works and I'm going to carry this out again." And she said the lower ability children are now knowing the answers. That 3 reading made a difference. I'm aware, Christina, I'm rattling through. Can I just, can I continue?
Carry on,
Just to put the teacher's quote, they liked the simplicity of this. They found it made a significant difference, not just to reading abilities, but children's self-confidence too. I think you will get some of these handouts. Hopefully you'll get the presentation. I mean, you know, the feedback was phenomenal. But what I just want to show you, can I just show you 2 examples of the videos so I'm going to see a 7-year-old reading as they do naturally, and then having used the direct instruction model, if that's okay.
Can I hear you reading? Okay, off you go.
When
Okay, so it's pretty excruciating. I didn't intervene. I wanted to see what's his reading like normally. We then did direct instruction, and this is him reading in the same session.
Okay. We zoom higher for butter. Together, we zoom higher for butter. Your turn.
we go
Zoom.
higher for butter.
Okay, so you can tell from his reading, he's trying to make sense of what he's reading. Oh,
Can I hear you
I
reading?
didn't realise that went there. I'm just going to show you now. Let's have a quick look at a shared reading. So this child is reading a bit better. So I'm just going in, I'm coming in with the whole word. What I say to children, and it might say it here, you won't fail. I'm here to give you any words you don't know.
It's a bit too easy for you. You're great at this reading.
We like to
Squelch.
squelch in the mud and stand on the sticks.
The twigs.
Twigs.
So listen to me read it. We like to squelch in.
Going to stop it there. So I go over it to help them make sense of it.
It's a bit too.
And I'm just going to show you, just in case you're thinking I just focus on young readers, a 9-year-old reader, and just the progress he makes. There is a bit of piano just to show its real life settings.
You show me how you read normally with adults when they're with.
He's looking round for clues. He's 9. He's given up on reading. He can't read, he tells me. He doesn't read, can't do it. I got him back at the end because the staff said, can you do a video to show how the difference, so we can share it with staff. So this is him about 2 hours later. He's been called back from his lunch, and I hurry him along a bit.
That is a bit hard for me to read like that.
Okay, so he's telling me the TA covers the words so he can just focus on the initial phonics. And he quite rightly says that makes it hard for me to read because I can't see the word, the rest of the word.
Really see the word.
Okay, so how do you read it now? Well, you try that first line on your own.
Oh, okay.
Good. Come nearer, then they can hear you.
That's my bed. That was my bed.
Right.
Poppy the beetle like to sing.
Excellent.
She sang all day
she sang for if she was happy. She
There we go. So oh, let me just 2 seconds, hopefully. Why we need to start this at Key Stage 2. This is the point that children start to become fluent readers. Struggling readers note that their peers are taking off and they are struggling, and their self-esteem starts to nosedive because they realize others are getting it and they don't. They don't read as much, they don't have access to that language. And if we can get in those first few years of Key Stage 2, it enables them to access the curriculum. Really important. If phonics hasn't worked by the end of Key Stage 1, we need to do something different. I'm glad I'm getting lots of thumbs up. Okay, moving it on. Working with parents, get all your parents using those instructional practices. Ooh, it's jumping. Because most parents I come across don't understand phonics and really struggle. Tips for you all. So adults need to know all the components of reading fluency. Fluency interventions need to include appropriate assessment that will identify targets to be inputted to. Struggling readers need to be taught to use a visual approach. Parents need to use this approach. Children need to be informed that when we're reading and when we read fluency, we're doing this switch from phonics, which is auditory, to visual modalities. I don't like tricky words. They're not tricky words. They're just words that need to be read visually. When children do that automatic switch, and it comes about when they're 7, 8, 9, from auditory to visual, that's when they become fluent readers. They can recognize words at sight. Reading needs to be fun. And if you think it only works for young children, this is feedback from a parent from, I saw in November, she was doing her A-levels, quite severely dyslexic. By April of doing these strategies, she was decoding. She didn't get the idea. You just look at a word and read it. So mum was super pleased and she got an A in her A-levels last year. Plenty of references for you, and any questions. We've probably got about 1 or 2 minutes. Sorry, ladies, 1 minute, but I wanted to get through everything. Christina, have you got
that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. For someone who is a visual learner, a child who struggled at school, that's why I write in the way I do. And the fact of expression, when I go into schools, it's kind of, it's so rewarding to see the children's face light up because they're taking part, feeling included, not kind of feeling left behind and left out. And that's how I felt as a child. So I think this whole conference is amazing. And what you just spoke about there, I absolutely love that. And I love Brzezinski as well. Yeah. And then about the kind of the rhyme, the rhythm, the poetry side of things, the songs, it really does all help. So thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we don't have time to have any questions, but what we have done in the chat is we've given everybody your email address.
Okay.
They can email you separately.
Okay.
And all your information is available. So we put your email address in, your contact details. So I'm sure they're all going to be contacting you because that's just amazing. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. I have written up a pack that, as I've put on here, if you contact Claire or myself, I'll be putting the pack out quite soon. I'm really sorry I didn't get a chance for questions, but I wanted you to have all that information. Please go forth and start using these techniques from Key Stage 2 and above. You will see a massive difference. In my schools, they're seeing 18 months progress in non-readers. So it is working. So please go and try out the assessments and the techniques. And thank you, Reading Solutions, for giving me this opportunity to share the information.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So bye everybody. See you on the next session.
Bye.
Thank you.